What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. But joining me and the two people you really want to know about are the one and only Perri Goldstein, she of Packs What She Said fame. You can follow her on Twitter at Perri_Goldstein. And he of ESPN Madison fame, he is Alex Strofe. You can follow him on Twitter at Alex_Strofe. Friends, how the heck are you doing?
Awesome, Andy. I hear you were out this weekend. What'd you have going on? Little celebration of marital bliss, is my understanding.
Yeah, 15 years of marriage, which seems insane because I know I only look 25. But I was not married when I was 10. Just some weird logistical math there that you got to figure out somehow. But clearly, I'm not that old, so it's really difficult to understand and comprehend. But yeah, 15 years of marriage, which is absolutely amazing. Super blessed. But yeah, we had a fun getaway to Door County, and
Nice.
Appreciate you and Jacob Westendorf for filling in for me. I know you get to do 2 episodes in 3 days, which is super fun. So yeah, excited to be talking with you guys.
High usage rate for me. Well, congratulations. Good to have you back. Hi, Perri. Wonderful to see you as well. How the heck are you?
It's so nice to be with you guys. I'm great. I leave for Wisconsin in 2 days.
Woo!
Actually landing in like 48 hours, and I can't wait to be up there.
Super exciting. You're going to the game, I assume, this weekend?
Yeah, we're going to a preseason game, going to see joint practices, get to see the Saints. Can't wait.
Should be amazing. We've got a really fun episode because we've got really fun stuff to talk about. I mean, a lot to talk about. We had returns from injuries. We had kicker transactions. We had new injuries. We had a practice that we get to talk about. We had some interesting offensive line shuffling. We've got a preseason game to talk about. We've got everything. But Perri, I'm just going to let you kick it off. Why don't you tell all of our listeners who already know the good news, but the 3 good pieces of news that we got from Matt LaFleur in his pre-practice press conference.
Oh yeah, we got some great information today. We're all very excited. I probably sound very sarcastic. I'm not. It's awesome because Elton Jenkins, Christian Watson, and Bobby Tonyan were activated off the pup and we're back at practice today, which is huge for a couple of reasons. One being 3 really important pieces to this offense, and 2, that it means that they will not be on the pup to start the season, which means if they're ready, they could potentially play week 1, which would be crazy for 2 players coming off an ACL from last season. So yeah, huge news.
Yeah. Alex, what were your initial thoughts when you heard the news today?
Hell yeah. Right. Like I was jacked. I mean, this is really good news. And as Perri said, we're going to be really happy if 2 of the 3 of them, being obviously Tonyan and Jenkins, are back for week 1. I don't know how realistic it is. I'm not a doctor. Andy, I'm going to defer to you in a second because you were at practice. You can fill us in on what they were doing work-wise. But Christian Watson, we haven't seen him yet. So I'm really hoping maybe we can get him in some preseason action the next 2 weeks. I don't know what the expectations are after the knee scope, but I was jacked. I was super pumped about this. This was awesome news to really start the brand new week following Friday's preseason game.
Yeah, big time. So Matt LaFleur made it very clear right away that this is a part of the process, right? It's not like these 3 guys are just activated off the pup and are now 100% good to go. But there's a couple things that we know for sure. A, it means that all 3 of them passed their physicals. So if in order to be activated, you have to pass their physicals. So it does mean that Jenkins, Watson, and Tonyan passed their physicals, which is huge news. As far as practice and what they did, they're not going to do any team activities. It's probably not going to come for a while. I'd be surprised. I don't think Jenkins or Tonyan are playing any preseason. Maybe Watson gets a cup of coffee in game 3. I think that's probably best case scenario. But I think in all likelihood, all 3 are probably held until the regular season. We don't know if it means that all 3 will be ready for week 1, but you have to believe that this does mean that they feel confident that all 3 will likely be ready within the first month of the season. Otherwise, there's really no advantage. In fact, there's a disadvantage to not or to bring them off the pup, because if you bring them off the pup, you cannot put them back on the pup, which the pup is really nice because if they stay on the pup all training camp long and you place them on the pup, you can do that prior to moving down to the 53-man roster, which means that you don't have to cut people and then put them on it. You can just keep them on it the entire time. Whereas now, if they aren't ready for the first 4 weeks, what they'd have to do is add them to the 53-man roster to begin with, cut other players, subject them to waivers, and then put these players on IR, bring them back at some point, which there's a finite amount of IR returns that you get now. So it would just not make a ton of sense to bring these guys back if they're not going to be ready to go within the first month of the season. And whether that's week 1 or week 4, or there could be setbacks, who the heck knows? But it's an abundance of good news all at one time. We'll keep a very close eye on all three of them. I thought Watson looked phenomenal at practice. He was cutting all over the place, just in individual drills, but he was cutting all over the place. He looked incredibly spry. If, again, to the untrained non-doctor eye, you would have had no idea that this guy was ever injured in any capacity. So I thought he looked phenomenal. Tonyan and Jenkins working off to the side have looked ready for about since about the start of training camp. And again, untrained, non-medical eye there as well. But you can tell that these guys are chomping at the bit, ready to go. Elton Jenkins said after practice that, he's got no issues and he's seemingly been ready for some time now. So there seems to be no lack of good news here for those three players.
Dude, that's so awesome, because after, a couple of weeks ago, when the last time we chatted, the three of us, we were just coming off more Bakhtiari delays and setbacks and question marks, which is what it's been the last year. So it's a huge relief to finally get good injury news from the Green Bay Packers. So that is awesome. I'm pumped.
And how great, we've been watching this Packers offense, and we understand that it hasn't been fully functional yet. And there've been some issues. The defense has been winning more often than not, but I think Packer fans are already ready to go into the season being like, all right, you can get by with Yash and Runyon and Myers, maybe a Zach Tom or a Royce Newman, a couple of those guys, you can probably get by with, Tyler Davis and, a couple of the tight ends, Josiah DeGuara, Dominic Daphne, Mercedes Lewis, until Tonyan gets back. Watson will, Romeo Doubs, and you've got all these, Amari Rogers stepping up. You're looking at all these spots and be like, all right, you can get by some of these guys, but man, imagine if all of a sudden Elton Jenkins, Robert Tonyan, Christian Watson, and maybe, hopefully, eventually David Bakhtiari are ready to go. You were ready to roll out this offense week one without any of those guys. And now all of a sudden, 3 of the 4 potentially back, at least early in the season. I mean, it's just such an amazing piece of news for the offense who needed some help, to be frank.
Yeah, for sure. I think offensive line has been such a conversation this offseason, and we talked about it. I think one of our last episodes where Andy had his really great analogy about the baseball rotation aces, and Elton Jenkins is one of your aces, and you just get such a better foundation when he's playing, no matter where it is. I saw I think it was Rob Domofsky tweeted about him taking reps, if you will, practices at right tackle. So maybe that means we feel like Buck's coming back and now we have our anchors on either side. Either way, it's all good news. And we'll get into this a little bit, but I think for me, the tight end room has been a huge question mark, and very much so after this preseason game, and way less questions if you have Tonyan out there as your kind of main pass catching tight end.
Yeah. So what Domofsky was saying and what we saw is that he was taking, he was just individual work. It was just him by himself, but how his stance was and how he's getting up out of his stance, it was a right tackle stance. He wasn't on the opposite. It wasn't a left side, wasn't anything like that. So it would seem to make the most sense that right tackle could be his home. As we start looking at the offensive line in peak form, right? You're probably, Bakhtiari's not going anywhere. He's the one guy that you're not messing with his position in any way, shape, or form. So he'd be your left tackle. And even if he's out, right, Yash's most natural position is left tackle. And I think it's been a little bit of a tell that over the last week or so with all the offensive line shuffling, Yash is not at right anymore. And I feel like this is just gut feel here that once they had a feel that maybe Elton is going to be back in time, that they're just you know what, we're going to put the kibosh on Yash at right tackle. No rhyme intended. And we're just
nicely done, though.
I know, right? We're going to focus him at left tackle because we know Elton's going to be ready at right. And it seems to make the most sense. And then everything else falls into place. Runyon, we'll talk about in a second, at left guard, Myers at center. And then all of a sudden now you've got Royce Newman, Zach Tom, maybe a Sean Ryan, maybe a Cole Van Lannon. You've got a lot of different guys that you could potentially rotate in at that right guard spot if you need to, and see who ultimately wins that role. But it just seems to make the most sense that Elton would long-term end up at right tackle.
That's the first I've heard that. So that's new to me, right? I've always said I'm infamously bad at the trenches. I'm not good at evaluating a line play. But when I hear question marks and read question marks like we have the last couple of weeks on Twitter and Packer Report and everywhere we read, it's good to hear obviously the Elton news, but some clarity on what's going to happen on that right side, letting obviously Billy Turner go from a year ago. So good news, Andy. Thanks for dumbing that down for me so I understand more.
Always here for you, buddy. We did have some bad news on the injury front. Dallin Levitt sounds like he's going to be out an extended period of time. It sounds like his injury was pretty serious. It sort of looked at the time when he forced the fumble in the 49ers game. You could see his arm kind of go limp right away. Don't know exactly how long or the injury, what those sort of things yet. But Matt LaFleur did mention that it was not a short-term type of thing. And then we had other players that were missing from practice due to injury, including Tariq Carpenter, Tipa Naliai, Juwan Winfrey, KB Nento, and Akil Byers. All those were new additions to the injury list. Byers was seen in a walking boot on the sideline. So that's always, not usually a great sign. We did have some returns to practice though as well. Devontae Wyatt returned to practice. Randall Cobb did, as well as Randy Ramsey. So it was sort of like a mixed bag of like some good news of players coming back, some bad news players dropping out. That just sort of the, day to day in the NFL, it feels like. But full list of players that were not participating was Juwan Winfrey, Tipa Naliai, KB Nento, Akil Byers, Dallin Levitt, Tariq Carpenter, Dominique Daphne, Innis Gaines, Darnell Savage, David Bakhtiari, Dante Vaughn, Mason Crosby, Cole Schneider, and Kylan Hill. So still a plethora of injuries. Matt LaFleur did mention of the new injuries that only Levitt he was concerned about from a long-term issue. So the rest of those hopefully aren't anything too crazy long-term, but again, you never want to see a guy in a walking boot either. So we'll just have to kind of monitor those injuries going forward. Thoughts on injury list, Perri?
I feel like this, maybe I'm misremembering, but it just feels like once pads come on and there's real contact, like in a preseason game, like this is bound to happen. And as long as nothing's too serious, I mean, I hate to hear about players getting hurt before the season starts. It just like breaks my heart. But as long as nothing's too serious, I think it sounds like they should be fine.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And we'll obviously monitor these. Mason Crosby's a big one there. David Bakhtiari, Darnell Savage. Some of those are definitely going to be worth monitoring very closely, but tough to be too bogged down in bad injury news when you have a day where Jenkins, Watson, and Tonyan come back off the PUP list. So we're going to stay in the realm of positive there. The other transaction for the day, Burkic is out at kicker. They released him on Sunday and they signed Ramiz Ahmed. I don't have a huge Ramiz Ahmed scouting report. I don't know if either of you guys do, but I will say just at practice, you could just see the ball came off his foot with I would say a more relative ease than what it was coming off of Burkic's foot. Like Burkic, you could almost see like he was trying to like aim and there wasn't a lot of pop off of his foot. And it was announced that he was dealing with an injury in the last game. So he was trying to kick through an injury, which is why probably some of the issues with kicking off, and they were doing some, trying to sky the kicks a little bit more and not do deep balls. And I'm sure it affected him on the miss of 30 some yards.
Can we talk about that, please? Can we just 1 second? Like I talked about it a couple days ago here on Pack a Day, but it still blows my mind 48 hours later how poorly that kick was missed. Like I used an analogy of the 50 Cent first pitch at that New York Mets game a couple years back. We've all seen the GIF. It was just a wild miss from the plate. This was just as bad. It went past the tunnel to the left corner stands. And I know he was dealing with an injury, so I hate to kick a guy while he's down, but that has to be one of the worst place kicks I've ever seen, Andy.
It probably was. I can't think of anything worse. It definitely is kicking a guy when he's down because dude hurts his hamstring, has to kick through it, which I'm sure was not easy, and then gets released the very next day after kicking through a hamstring injury. So definitely feel for the guy. I'm sure that maybe this would have gone down a little bit different had he been kicking consistently through camp, and maybe they want to keep him around, but he had been inconsistent through camp too. Nothing that bad, no bad misses in that way, but this was, I think, coming almost no matter what. So I feel for the guy, but that was an ugly kick.
All of it's a moot point anyway, because we know that Mason Crosby is the starter. So
very fair point.
They just need a body that's good enough as a backup at this point.
Yes and no, right? But we don't know if Mason's ready for week 1. So is
his injury that bad? Do we know the severity of it?
No.
Someone should ask Matt that, Andy.
Yeah. So we think and maybe hope that he's ready to go week 1. And I think we can hope try to manifest it into existence. But I don't know that there's a guarantee 100% lead pipe lock that Mason's ready to go week 1 yet. So, we'll see.
Going touchdowns and 2-point conversions only.
Only, exactly.
Preferably.
So, I would think and this is just, again, me thinking out loud here, no inside info. I would think if Mason wasn't going to be ready for week one, that they'd be showing a bit more urgency, and there'd probably be a couple different kickers in camp and trying to work some of this stuff out and that. So I think it's probably headed in that direction. But until we see that, I think there's at least has to be some level of like, because even if it's like week 2, right? Like not having Mason Crosby week 1 and throwing Ramiz Ahmed out there could lose you a game week 1. Like, and that could be not insignificant when it comes down to final standings at the end of the year. So we'll see. But as of right now, minor kicker transaction that could turn out to be a major kicker transaction if Crosby's out longer than we think, but hopefully he's back and ready to go week 1.
I don't mean to take this off the rails, but just real quick question, we'll get it over with. Do the Packers have like an emergency kicker? Like Randall Cobb is the emergency quarterback, right? Like who's the emergency kicker in case like Crosby was to get hurt and they don't have a second one signed? Is there an answer here?
I would assume it would be Pat O'Donnell. Usually,
oh yeah, I guess so. Okay, but punter aside, like go past the punter. Who would it be then? I want like skill position.
You need Justin Reed for the Chiefs, who's out there kicking extra points. Like he's kicked off for the Texans in the past. Like that's a crazy. The interesting one, and we're way off the rails now, but like the interesting thing is like in the last couple of years, Tipa has practiced as the emergency long snapper and actually done a really good job at it. He hasn't been, I forget who it was. I want to say it was, I don't remember who it was. Doesn't matter. But like, it wasn't Tipa doing the emergency long snapping. So that was semi-interesting, but I know. Maybe they're just having Tipa focus. He's too good of an edge rusher. You can't risk him at long snapping, I guess. But no, it'll be interesting. Hopefully we never have to figure out who the emergency kicker is, Alex, especially if we get past Pat O'Donnell too.
Yeah, then we're in really bad
shape. We're very fair point conversion, 4th down attempts only at that point.
Sorry, the ADHD coming out on a Sunday night. Anyway, let's continue.
All right, let's do a quick practice breakdown. I had the opportunity to attend practice. It was a closed practice, only about hour and 20 minutes, I should say, somewhere around there. They wanted to focus on guys who didn't play in the game, so a lot of starters. But Kingsley Enagbare had a phenomenal game. Phenomenal practice. He had been one of the more quiet players all throughout training camp up until the preseason game. I thought he played very well in the preseason game and then followed it up. I think he had like 3 or 4 pressures on Sunday's practice, and again, in a shorter practice. So he seems to be putting the pieces together a little bit. The final 2-minute period was very fun. Offense drives all the way down the field. 4th and 10. They get a Randy Ramsey jumping off sides, free play, which gives Rodgers an attempt at the end zone. Doesn't go well. Rasul Douglas picks it off. It didn't really matter because Rodgers was just throwing it there, whatever. But they get another play, and Enagbare comes off the edge against Royce Newman. Immediate pressure on Rodgers' face. Rodgers sort of does a whirling dervish, like spinning, and like fades off the back of his foot and just throws one up in the end zone, which in the corner of the end zone, somehow Aaron Jones comes down with in the back of the end zone, catches it. The offense goes nuts. They're freaking out and going crazy. I think forgetting the fact that the situation they were in was they were down by 7 points. So there was 6 points and they were going to go for 2. The interesting aspect is after this play, they attempted the next play from the 7-yard line. So I don't know if because the offense was celebrating, they gave them like a delay of game penalty or something, and they made the offense go from like the 7 or 8-yard line and not the whatever. But anyway, they had to go for 2 from like the 7-yard line. And then Rodgers, once again, was pressured. He throws one. Romeo Doubs comes up with a ridiculous catch, but he was about 2 yards out of bounds. And now, because the offense went nuts celebrating, the defense, led by Joe Barry, of all people, comes out completely mocking the offense and just going nuts, and everyone runs on the field. Doubs thought he was interfered with. It was all fun and games, but it was a really intense 2-minute period. Really quick, I'll let you guys comment on that in just a second. Devondre Campbell had a really good day. Again, he's been phenomenal in camp. And then the other really interesting note, I don't make much of it yet, but we'll have to keep an eye on it going forward. Zach Tom got starting snaps at left guard, and John Runyon was not in on those plays. So it was Runyon started the day as the starting left guard, and then Tom took over snaps. Then Runyon came back, and then in the final 2-minute drill, it was Zach Tom and not John Runyon Jr. Now, the only thing I think maybe just Runyon needed a little bit of extra rest, or it didn't seem like an injury issue, or maybe they just wanted to see what Tom could do at left guard. Who knows? But like it didn't. The reason I'm not super concerned about Runyon or anything like that is because he still to me seems like the best offensive lineman besides Jenkins or Bakhtiari, and it seems to me it would be insane if they all of a sudden benched him in favor of Jake Hansen or Royce Newman or someone like that. Number 2 is that it wasn't like all of a sudden Zach Tom was with the 1s and then John Runyon Jr. was running with the 2s. He was just off to the side during those plays. So I think Runyon's safe, but it was an interesting development nonetheless that Tom got snaps with the 1 and Runyon was out on those plays. Perri, I'll start with you first. Comments on anything that happened at practice today.
Yeah, you kept tweeting about the Zach Tom thing. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like in practice, they're probably just planning for every case scenario. And they were just like, we put you everywhere. Why not just like try left guard now as like a just in case, see how it goes. So I agree with you. I don't like think too much of it, especially if you don't think John Runyon Jr. is hurt, which let's like, please like not be hurt.
He seemed okay. It didn't seem like, and again, he came back after. So it's just interesting nonetheless. Like, maybe they're lighting a fire under Runyon, you never know what those sort of things are, but it was interesting nonetheless. Alex, any of your takeaways?
Well, I got to say the way you described that 2-minute drill was phenomenal. What was the word dwarf? Is that what you used when you said Aaron
Whirling
Rodgers?
dervish.
Whirling dwarvish. Right. Never heard that term in my life, but I pictured perfectly what Rodgers did in my head. That's a really interesting sequence though. And I thought you did a nice job explaining that. I had not seen this on Twitter or anything yet. So no grand takeaways. Good to hear they're having fun. Good to hear Aaron Rodgers is doing Aaron Rodgers stuff and whirling dwarvish or whatever the hell you just said. But super fun stuff and ready to get, dude. I'm so jacked. We had real football. Now we got another game coming up just like that. I'm so excited. Packers football is back.
Andy, I imagine that touchdown being like that crazy one that Jamal Williams had in the Chiefs game. That's what I was picturing.
opposite side of the end zone, but yes. And I didn't think Aaron Jones had those ups. We think we were like all trying to like disseminate what happened on the sidelines. That like it was everyone. Like, we were trying to figure out. We think it was Eric Stokes that was in coverage on the play who tried to like rip the ball out at the end. But like I didn't know Aaron Jones had those ups to go get that ball. He apparently does, and he did. But it was a really crazy clutch play by Aaron Jones. It was just a really fun moment at the very end of practice to again what they thought got the offense the win. It technically did not, but very fun period, very competitive between the offense and the defense. All right, let's get to our fun topic for today. That is stock up and stock down. We'll kind of go through this a little bit lightning round here, but Alex, we will start with you. And then what we're doing here is going over a player from the start of training camp through now that we're 14 practices, family night, 1 preseason game in. We'll start with stock up. Alex, who is a player on your radar who you feel like their stock is up considerably since the start of training camp?
All right, so I took a different lens. I was going more the last couple of days than overall, but I think this still applies, right? Amari Rodgers is a guy we haven't mentioned yet. I'm sorry, Perri, that I wanted to bring up, though. Obviously, the big kick return early in that game on Friday, and Rich Bisaccia is celebrating with him after, obviously, those two had gone I don't want to say butted heads quite, but Bisaccia had lit him up a few times in practice the week prior. But then obviously the late touchdown as well for Amari on Friday. Looks sleeker, looks faster. Let's just hope he can produce more than 4 catches, which is what he did in his rookie year. So I would say Amari Rodgers stock actually significantly up.
Perri, you had a similar thought on Rodgers?
I totally agree. Yeah. I just think everything I've heard about the way he looks too, and like the way he's moving, the way he can cut, just like his agility. And then you watch him return a kick return for 51 yards. That just felt like such a redemption moment for him. Like, he's like, I read the tweets. I know what you think of me on special teams. Like, I'm going to do better. But I can give my next, I had a list of them. There were actually a bunch. So like, shout out to the Packers. There's a ton of players like I feel like we could have talked about in this category, but my stock up is Tyler Goodson. I thought he just played really, really well in the preseason game. I kind of went with Alex's thought process. I was like preseason forward, but running back 3 is not kind of open, like up for grabs. And I think going into the season, I thought it would just be Patrick Taylor, but he's been hurt and he hasn't like really been playing that great. And I thought Goodson ran really well in the preseason game, like really well. I thought he was like really agile and worked really well behind that offensive line. So I was excited for him because I think him and BJ, you could put BJ Baylor in there too, but I think they both are making like really great cases for themselves as not just practice squad guys, but guys that can potentially like really contribute.
Yeah, Goodson got lit up twice on Friday, and he popped right back up and was ready to get after it, which I loved. But he got hit pretty hard 2 different occasions in Friday's game. Sorry, Andy, continue.
No, you're good. He did. He probably needs to learn to run not quite so upright. Probably something he can work on a little bit. But a couple things with Goodson first. One of the things that I noted, because I did like a stock up after the game, and people were asking like, why wasn't Tyler Goodson on your list? And I said, it wasn't because Goodson had a bad game. It's just like I've seen him at practice every day, and I actually had higher expectations for what I thought Goodson was capable of. So So just for those people who thought like that Goodson had a good preseason game, let me just tell you, there's a lot more that he can do than what you saw in preseason. So he's a very talented player, very excited about him. Like I said, there's a couple things he needs to work on. Running upright's definitely one of those, but overall still very bullish on him. Amari, I still think there's things that he needs to work on. Route running, Matt LaFleur just mentioned in his press conference today, as well as something he needs to work on. I think he needs to work on his blocking too, but I mentioned it about maybe a week ago, maybe a little bit less of that. Like you can see in his returns, even in practice, just how much more confident he is returning. And like, he's just more decisive. He is more direct with what he's trying to do, and he's quicker, right? Like you can tell the difference in his foot speed, and it's a major change. And I did notice that Amari Rodgers blocked me on Twitter, and I was very curious because I'm like one of the things I did this season is like, don't give up on Amari Rodgers. And I'm like, I've been very positive. And then I like was looking back at tweets. And then I did realize that back on November 7th of last year, I tweeted Amari Rodgers catching punts with all the confidence of a fifth grader at his first boy girl dance. So I have a feeling that may have been the tweet that got me blocked by Amari Rodgers, understandably so. Amari, I am sorry. It was true at the time, but I still love you. And I hope that you have a phenomenal season, and I can understand you blocking me for it. So I get that. So I'm going to go honorable mention.
Can you ask him about it? Because you're like, are you in the locker room?
I could be in the locker room. I don't get there, unfortunately, not because I have a whole day job that I got to do and everything like that. So, but I guess I could ask him about it, but I think I'll probably pass. Honorable mentions on my stock up to Isaiah McDuffie and Vernon Scott, who I both think are trending very much in the right direction. But for start of camp until now, I know he didn't play in the preseason game, but I got to go Jerron Reed. Dude has been phenomenal at camp. I can't wait to see him in games. We'll see if he plays in either week 2 or 3 of the preseason, but there's a reason they probably didn't play him in week 1 because he's been that freaking good. The defensive line's been phenomenal. I could just say defensive line as a whole. TJ Slayton's another one, but I'm going to go Jerron Reed, who has, like I said, been phenomenal at camp so far. So usually that's a kiss of death, by the way. Usually that's a jinx. Whoever is like dominating camp then like goes on and struggles. So sorry, Jerron Reed, but he's been nothing short of phenomenal so far.
I had TJ Slayton on there also.
Slayton's very much in the
I think it's just really hard for defensive line to like do anything that makes you go wow in practice. And then when you get them out there in a game, you're like, whoa, it's like extra wow moment. So
especially when you see some of the special things Slayton was doing, like stacking people, shedding, and just using his raw power and athleticism. Like that dude is a special freak athlete that if he hits, like look the heck out. That changes this defense entirely, because if you get a top end player with that skill set, like there's a lot of fun to be had there. All right, Perri, I will let you start with stock down this time. Who is a player whose stock you are down on?
Okay. I feel like my stock is kind of always down on him, but I'm always wrong, but I'm going to go with it anyway. But I'm just really down on Jake Hansen. I don't know if it's what I'm missing. I'm like you, Alex. Like sometimes maybe offensive line is not my thing, but he just had 2 horrible penalties in the preseason game. Like you absolutely cannot do those things. And I think when you're vying for a spot where there's a lot of guys who can play in the interior, right? Like the Packers have maybe the tackles are questions, but interior, there's plenty of people who are ready to take those spots. And like you basically in these moments have to be almost perfect in order to like prove that you deserve that. And the penalties for me, I was like, no, we're done here.
Alex?
Oh, I could go like 8 different ways here. I'm going to go with Tyler Davis. He had a rough game Friday, and maybe this is my own fault because my expectations for him, as you alluded to a little bit earlier with Goodson, Andy, my expectations for him were high, right? Like we saw some flashes at the end of last year. We've seen some flashes in practice this year by all means, because if I'm not mistaken, Andy, he's been running with the ones quite a bit throughout camp. But Friday, 2 big drops, 1 big drop, obviously, that turned to Jordan Love's first interception, and then a second target that he was unable to come up with. 0 catches in the first preseason game. My expectations were for him to really separate himself, right? Maybe throw himself, vehemently in that top rotation conversation, but didn't see that in the first preseason game. But it seemed, Andy, he may have bounced back with a solid practice on Sunday from the little I saw on Twitter. Am I coming out of left field there, or am I spot on?
He had a nice catch from Rodgers in the middle of the field, caught in stride, had some good separation. I had Tyler Davis 1 on my list as well. Listen, if you like a month ago, I had said this multiple times, he to me was the more likely number 1 starter at tight end in week 1 of the regular season. Well, guess what? Now Tonyan's potentially back and off the PUP list. He's coming off a terrible game where he drops a pass that leads to a pick and had 2 at least 2 blocks that got completely blown up that were completely his fault. And then DeGuara's had a good camp. Daphne's had a good camp. Mercedes Lewis is not going anywhere. So like you start doing some roster math and all of a sudden what I thought was like the guy who was going to be number 1 tight end week 1. Yeah. Now you're like, I still think he's likely to make the team, but like now it's more of a question and he has work to do in these final 2 weeks, if nothing else. So I'm in agreement on Tyler Davis. I think Jake Hansen, like, if he wasn't practicing with the ones, you're probably not like too disappointed with where he'd be at. Like overall, like still bad plays, still bad penalties, but like if he was like a depth piece, you're like, okay, not a huge deal. But like with the fact that he was even still with the ones on Sunday after a not great preseason game, I thought for sure that was going to be Zach Tom with Royce Newman inside coming off that preseason game. It was not. So that'll be worth keeping an eye on. I'll go with Royce Newman though. I legitimately thought after Royce Newman's rookie, I know he wasn't great his rookie year, but I thought like the fact that he was able to get through 1,000 snaps and be like, what I would define as like not terrible. Like there was definitely some plays where you're like, oh, that's not great. But like, also like if you're going to play 1,000 snaps as a rookie, there's going to be a few of those moments. And I really thought that from like a technical standpoint, and I thought he'd add some functional strength, that he would come back and be significantly better than he was potentially his rookie year. I don't necessarily envy the fact that they're moving him between right tackle and right guard. I don't necessarily envy the fact that he's got to go against Rashawn Gary almost every single day at practice. But I just haven't been super impressed with his, improvement or lack thereof. So I would go with Royce Newman. Sammy Watkins was another player that I had on my list too. But I think all of those players are worthy of consideration. All right, really, really quick. I do want to talk a little bit of Jordan Love before we get out of here. Perri, I'll start with you. Your impressions of Jordan Love following week 1 preseason against the 49ers.
Okay. Everyone has like very polarizing
weird how that works
thoughts about this. Like I'm still very in the middle about him. I just feel like he's clearly improved. Like there's clearly some areas that he's improved on. He's like much more decisive. You can see him not like thinking as much, right? He's just like letting the ball go. He had some beautiful throws and he still has some really like, what the heck was that moments? And I think that's just like either he's still growing and there's still some growing pains, which I think is fair. At some point though, like there's not going to be development anymore. And this just might be who he is. And we don't know that yet though, because we've seen him in like 4 games and he only got to play the first half, which I have lots of questions about. Like, why did Danny Etling need an entire half? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I just think like there's development, clear development, but still a ways to go. And that's just what it is.
Alex?
Yeah, I'll use some visual aids here. My stock up, stock down card. You'll notice I have Burkich top of my stock down card. I wrote this before I knew he got cut.
You have Love on both?
I have Love on both. That's how neutral I am on what Jordan Love did on Friday. I'm really impressed with comfortability and poise, like in the offense, right? He looked like he understood, the offense better than he did a year ago, which makes me feel a little bit better about throwing him in emergency situations like we had to against Kansas City a year ago. Why I have stock down is because like there's still erratic plays. There's still, mistakes and bad reads and just poor decision-making that hasn't been cleaned up as much as we'd like to see now in year 3. And maybe you could even call it year 2 for Jordan Love because he didn't have any preseason, obviously wasn't active for any of his games, his quote unquote rookie year. But you'd wish there was a little bit more progression there, but he does look more comfortable. He understands the offense more. So I'm really neutral on him, right? Like I could talk about him both positively and negatively after Friday's performance, but I don't think there's a huge grand takeaway from preseason game 1.
Yeah. Andy, I have a question for you before you answer, because the third interception, I know the first 2 were like, one of them was clearly Tyler Davis's fault. The third one, like, looked like Jordan Love's fault. Was I missing something? Matt LaFleur said 2 guys ran wrong routes. Okay. Amari didn't, but the ball was just not placed right. Or shocker, the defender who also gets paid made a good play. I don't know. I think I'm going with the latter, but like,
yeah, so a couple things, and Matt LaFleur made a little bit of mention. LaFleur said today the ball still shouldn't have gone there. So, like, regardless of what routes, like, it has to become an off-script play at that standpoint. Or at that point, if things aren't going the way that they're supposed to. Amari didn't do a good job of gaining separation. If you do look, like, there's a view of it where like he's throwing with anticipation, and I think he's expecting Amari to get a little bit more separation. And I think based on the look and where he was at, again, I think Matt LaFleur's right. Like you don't want to throw the ball in that situation. I think you hold it. So I think that's a learning moment for him. I think the accuracy, even if he was throwing with anticipation, I think he needed it a little bit more ahead of the receiver. So even if the defender does cut in and make a play, it's at least a more difficult play for the defender, and the receiver has a better chance. So I think there's a bit of everything. I think his teammates let him down on that play, didn't run the right routes, didn't get the separation that he needed. I think he needed to take the ball down and just do something different and make that an off script play rather than continuing on with it. I think that's my biggest thing right now for Jordan Love, is I think you can tell he's still thinking through everything. And that's why I'm actually somewhat, still hopeful in the fact that I think he can potentially still become something, is because you never know when that moment's going to come where things just slow down. And he clearly he's getting closer. We're seeing signs of him like hitting balls that he hasn't hit in the past and getting to the top of his drop and ripping the football, which he hasn't done in the past, but it's still inconsistent. You can still tell he's going through everything. And I almost equate it to like at times watching Giannis shoot a 3-pointer. And I would, if I were to say that I was comparing Jordan Love to Giannis, that's usually going to be a good thing. But this is like almost at times Giannis shooting a 3 where you're like, man, like it's mechanical, but it's going in sometimes. And like at times you're like, all right, I can see what he's trying to do there, but it's still like the thought process from mechanics to reads to throwing the football with accuracy is still almost like this mechanical approach at times. There's times the Dubs throw is a perfect example where you see it all come together, but I just don't think it's quite there yet. So I think there's still a lot of room for growth, but we got to get out of here. Perri, tell us where we can find you.
Just follow me on Twitter at Perri_Goldstein and listen to Facts What She Said.
And Alex?
On Twitter at Alex_Strofe and at ESPN Madison. Tune in 2 to 4.
We'll talk a lot more Jordan Love here on the Pack a Day podcast. Make sure to tune in. I appreciate both of you. I'll be right back here tomorrow with an all new episode on YouTube. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.
See ya.